Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hassen, and thank you for making the critical point that this kind of inquiry and the more effective enforcement of sanctions and export control is no substitute for the kind of military and humanitarian assistance contained in the supplemental. And we want to degrade the Russian military capability, but at the same time, we need to enhance Ukraine's capability, provide it with the long-range artillery that is so important to destroying the command centers and the munitions storage depots that they can and will destroy, the Kerch Bridge, which is an essential link to Crimea. Those kinds of targets require that long-range artillery. And the stark fact that we heard when we visited Ukraine, not only from President Zelensky and his military team, but from our own military leadership there and our intelligence community, is Ukraine can win. They will win if they have that kind of support, but without it, they will lose. And so, as important as this inquiry is, it is no substitute for the kind of aid that the House must approve. That supplemental is absolutely vital for Ukraine's continuing fight on the battlefield. And right now, they are losing troops and they're losing ground because they simply don't have enough ammunition. And that is criminal, in my view. Let me ask Mr. Spleeters, we've heard from some industry advocates that the reason Russia is able to acquire recently manufactured chips is because they repurpose them from things like washing machines or other household appliances. In your written testimony, you wrote that this idea, and I'm quoting, couldn't be further from the truth. How do you know that repurposed chips are not the main driver behind what's now being recovered from Russian weapon systems?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this question. We have seen no evidence of this happening. So opening those systems, we have seen no evidence of chips being ripped off and then repurposed for this. And frankly, you know, I'm always open to new evidence coming up, and it may come in the future. But to us, it makes little sense that Russia would buy a $500 washing machine for a $1 part that they could obtain more easily otherwise. Some of these chips, of course, can also fit household appliances, but others cannot, unless your washing machine can fly, which I doubt. The components that we find in Russian drones do not fit washing machines. So right now we have no evidence to support that hypothesis.
Washing machines are not flying
Not
yet. Neither are elephants. There are a lot of myths surrounding these parts and components reaching Russians, but I think it is irrefutable that the Russians have found a way to circumvent the export controls and the sanctions. Ms. Rybakova, based on your research, would you agree that these parts and components come from sources other than washing machines?
Thank you so much. I full-heartedly agree with that. So as you know, the coalition of countries led by the US identified 45 priority items, and you put them up on the chart, the battlefield goods. These are different trade categories. And we monitor Russia's imports of these specific trade categories. So this category does not include washing machines that don't fly. It's specifically battlefield goods. And we have seen a significant pickup in imports. That said, in the first months after the beginning of the war, the full-scale invasion and imposition of export controls, we've seen a drop. It almost halved for so many months, for a few months, and then it picked up again as Russia found evasion techniques. So we see evidence of Russia continuing to import these new components. Many of them are produced outside the United States on behalf of the US companies.
Thank you. And I know your organization has published reports after those reports were published, numerous banks apparently reached out to you to make sure that they were not inadvertently helping transfer funds supporting export control evasion. Is that correct?
It is correct. We're not a big organization, so we don't do much outreach. We're just a few people doing research. So as soon as our report was published in June and then was featured in Newsweek and Politico and other outlets, within the first week, we had a few financial institutions reach out to us from their compliance departments asking how we can cooperate, how they can obtain similar data, what are the red flags we're picking up. And since then, it has continued.
And let me ask you, did any semiconductor companies reach out to you after you published your first report on this topic in 2023 or in 2024 when you did a follow-up report?
So far, no semiconductor company has reached out to us, but we're, of course, open to cooperate. We want to make it better together, and we're happy to share any findings, data research, and to work together with them.
And did you reach out to those semiconductor companies?
We have sent our reports to these companies, and also our reports have been featured in the press extensively, so they could have also seen it there.
But you've received no response?
We have not yet received responses.
Crickets, nothing.
We hope to hear from them soon.
Well, I have to say I'm really deeply troubled by the lack of any response after those reports were issued and after you reached out to provide them with copies of those reports. It seems like they really didn't want to know or didn't want to act in response to those reports. Mr. Byrne, did any semiconductor companies reach out to your organization after you published your report in 2022?
Limited, but we have had some conversation with some of the semiconductor companies. But again, I would say that is relatively limited in people that have wanted to talk to us.
In fact, as I understand it, NVIDIA reached out to you, correct?
Yes.
But not Analog Devices, not AMD, not Intel, not Texas Instruments, correct?
We have spoken to Intel, but the others, I don't believe so. No
response from any of them except Intel. And what was Intel's inquiry? Our position, like my colleagues, is we are on a mission to help and disrupt the supply chains. We are very, very happy to talk to anybody. We welcome engagement. We want to show them how we do it. And, you know, we're very happy with that. That's what we would welcome. So any of these companies that want to speak to us, we very much welcome an outreach. But they really haven't sought it?
We've had very little.
Your organization's work relies on the cooperation of the semiconductors to conduct tracing, correct?
We have done some of that, but it's slightly different than Damien. We have taken a slightly different approach, which is what my team does, open source intelligence. And so we've done the work backwards. So we have been in Ukraine. We have taken apart a lot of weapons and documented the components. And we've tried to work out on a big picture the supply chains of how they move into the country. And we've had a lot of success doing so using a range of sources. So we know how components are getting in many, many cases, and not just components, machine tools, bearings, a range of things. And I'd just like to add on the washing machine story. I mean, we have, again, we haven't seen any evidence of that, but we do have evidence of the fact that supply chains going directly to sanctioned companies, to Russian military entities, procuring this stuff on the market that then ends up in Russian weapons platforms.
So these parts and components, the brains of precision munitions, as one of you said, are not going through washing machines. They're going through distributors. The companies know who the distributors are. They know the countries where the distributors are located, and they know the weapons where those parts and components are used. On the topic of what can be done, Ms. Rybakova, you published an op-ed, I think yesterday, or maybe it was today, And I want to quote one of the lessons, I think it's the second lesson in that op-ed, quote, "The consequences of non-compliance must be strong enough to affect companies. Evasion of sanctions is a predictable reaction for companies drawn to profitable markets. Introducing steeper penalties coupled with an increased likelihood of detection can significantly reshape their risk-reward calculus," end quote. Again, as a former prosecutor, I know if the penalties aren't high enough, there will be disobeyance. If there is a penalty that inflicts pain, then companies will pay attention. Could you expand on that point?
Thank you so much. As macroeconomist, indeed, I approach this as a risk-reward analysis. On one hand, we have any company wants to make money legally for their shareholders. On the other hand, compliance departments are extremely costly. You can talk to banks. It is a difficult, costly endeavor, which not every company wants to invest into. On the other side of the scale, you have the probability of being caught, the cost of being caught, and how quickly you will be punished if you were to do something wrong. So there is a sort of a financial equation that many companies look at. And therefore, we need to tip that scale towards companies themselves investing in compliance departments that will catch the shipments before they reach the malign actors. Because by the time they reach the end user or end use, it is already too late. It's almost impossible for authorities to go and check that and find that. So that's what I was trying to explain in my op-ed.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the ranking member. I have a few more questions, but I don't want to